So we've covered Aura and Mare separately, gone through their skills, abilities, strengths, and weaknesses, but what does all that mean in the grand scheme of things? How do they stack up against everyone else in Nazarick, and how would they perform in combat? I mean, there must be a reason why they were both chosen to guard the same floor together. So let's actually answer the question of how strong are Aura and Mare, and finally wrap up this joint character profile of the Dark Elf twins. But first, this video is sponsored by Cacao Games, bringing us yet another new class to the popular MMORPG Black Desert Online. A gorgeous, seamless open-world game with some of the most polished graphics that I've ever experienced, especially after the remaster update. On top of that, it has a highly refined real-time action-based combat system, lots of crafting, life skilling, housing, and economy aspects, as well as an insanely detailed character creation tool, with now 18 unique classes to choose from, each with their own skills and abilities. Speaking of which, the newest Shy class was just released on June 26th, which was pretty good timing since it's a pretty good class to try to recreate Aura with. This is BDO's first class centered around being a support. She's equipped with a boomerang for close to mid-range combat, but also has an alchemical sub-weapon that's used to protect both herself and her allies. And due to her small nature, she's very nimble, just like Aura, easily traversing all types of terrain to gain the upper hand. Anyway, the Shy class is just one of many content updates that Black Desert Online constantly puts out. So if you're interested in giving BDO a go, then you can use the link in the description and get a 7-day free trial today. Now, let's get back to the video. Based on their stat pools, Mare is a good all-rounder, and Aura is a support specialist, but by themselves, neither of them would be particularly powerful enough to take on a 1v1 specialist like Shaltir. They just don't have the sustained DPS output over time of someone like Cocytus or Sebas, and neither of them could execute a powerful burst attack from a build like those belonging to Obertalain Odal, Pararanchino, or Nishikion Rai. So what would be their role in combat? Fundamentally, the two of them specialize in large group battles. The majority of Mare's spells have a massive area of effect and are very good at delaying, damaging, or outright destroying enemy armies, while Aura has a large army herself of very powerful magical creatures. In a traditional head-to-head battle, Aura might command her beasts from the center, using her breath to buff them all. Meanwhile, Mare would sling his massive spells from the rear, calling down lightning storms and tornadoes to sow chaos in the enemy formation. But it would seem that their capabilities are much better used in guerrilla tactics. In fact, they seem to be custom fit for the floor that they were tasked with guarding. If you remember, we talked a little bit about the major features of the 6th floor of Nazarick, including the fact that it was covered mostly by forest, and we mentioned that Aura and Mare were its floor guardians. By now, it should be a lot more clear as to how and why they were best suited to guard this dense forest. Any large enemy moving through the floor would need to be able to navigate at least portions of the dense forest that blanketed the terrain, slowing down their progress if any of them weren't proficiently skilled. There could even be forest-related traps like poisonous flowers or fungi. Many of Aura's creatures could also probably utilize this forest to camouflage themselves and launch ambushes, whittling down small groups of enemies before regrouping and preparing for another ambush. And they're likely much more mobile than any intruders that would be on the floor, since we know for a fact that some of them can ignore any debilitating effects of the terrain. Aura herself could use her Sky Eye skill to monitor the area even through the dense forest. Her breath skill, primary weapon, ranged attacks, and stealth proficiency would synergize well with her powers of observation, allowing her to strike at enemies even through the concealment and cover provided by the terrain. Meanwhile, Mare could enchant or animate the various trees or plants to attack foes, possibly even teleporting from tree to tree while casting spells. His terrain manipulation could confuse the enemy, as they wouldn't necessarily be able to see the changes in the topology of the environment, given all the trees that block their field of view. And he would also be able to support Aura's beasts with his own assortment of buffs and even healing spells. But that's not to say that these tactics couldn't be employed in other kinds of terrain. It's just that they'd be highly effective on the 6th floor. Of course, as NPCs, they probably wouldn't have been able to do such complex teamwork in the video game Yggdrasil, since that would require some pretty advanced AI scripts that the video game simply didn't support. But Ainz was a role-playing guild, and most of the NPCs were designed for roleplay reasons. That said, remember, Buku Buku Chugama played a tank, and was a raid group leader in the guild. As a matter of fact, she was one of the most skilled at what she did. So, she may have been considering all the factors that went into performing a successful raid when creating their builds, and use that knowledge to build Aura and Mare in a way that would make it as hard as possible to traverse the 6th floor, coming up with tactics and strategies that only a skilled raid leader would consider. So it's possible that Aura and Mare could have just been more of a fun thought project than an actual defense force. Of course, the 2 floor guardians and their army of magical creatures would still work decently well as a defense force, even if they didn't behave as intelligently as a real player. Fortunately, now that Nazarick and its NPCs have been moved to the New World, they have the ability to easily employ such advanced tactics if Nazarick was ever attacked, though that will likely never happen. What's more important is that this free will has allowed Ainz to delegate other responsibilities to them. They don't just spend all of their free time mulling around in the 6th floor. The pair of them have been kept fairly busy doing all manner of things for Ainz, both on and off the screen. Mare's primary responsibilities so far have mainly required the use of his magic, while Aura has been responsible for managing and conquering the wilderness around Nazarick. Going into more detail, if you'll recall back in Season 1, one of the first things that Ainz orders Mare to do is to disguise Nazarick via terrain manipulation magic, namely by surrounding it with various hills in order to camouflage its profile on the horizon. He had issued this order early on, back when he didn't really know how strong he or Nazarick was relative to everyone else in the New World. You see, after being told that the base was no longer in the swamp that it originally occupied in Yggdrasil, Ainz became concerned that Nazarick would be too easily discovered. So after Mare was finished, the only people who could find Nazarick would be those who stumble directly on top of it by accident, those who pass over it using flight magic, or those who could scan the area from above via divination magic. Now, Mare might have also been involved in the creation of the Green Hole, the settlement of lizardmen and plant creatures that's being used as a farm on the 6th floor. The name came from the fact that it was located in a vast clearing right in the middle of the forest. From above, it looked as if a hole swallowed up everything that was once there. Now, unless this clearing had already existed, it's likely some nature manipulation magic would have been used to clear out the trees in the area. In any case, we know he goes there every once in a while to cast some weather manipulation magic in order to produce rain to irrigate the crops and the plant creatures. This is because the 6th floor doesn't properly model any weather effects aside from the wind. Lastly, Ainz also entrusted Mare to guard him during the massacre of Cat's Plains in Season 3. I briefly mentioned this in Mare's video, but Ainz had equipped him with the world item Avarice and Generosity, the one that absorbs the souls of slain creatures, then grants the user XP to power certain extremely powerful spells and abilities. Of course, if absorbing XP was the only reason why he brought Mare along, then he wouldn't need him. Ainz could just wear the gauntlets himself. So why was Mare there? You see, Ainz came up with a trap, using himself as bait. His plan was to charge up the super tier spell that we saw, knowing that the cast time of it was very long. If another high-level player saw him casting this, they would immediately know what was happening, and it would be expected for them to launch a surprise teleportation ambush or sniper attack, as interrupting him during the cast time would put his super tier spell on cooldown and negate its effect. Having stood there for several moments while charging this ability during a battle between one of the 2 largest nations, this was the final piece of evidence that he needed to confirm that there were no high-level players even remotely connected to any of the major nations present. But if there were, his plan to use himself as bait would have potentially put him in danger. So it's reasonable to conclude that he trusted Mare to guard him from any surprise attacks during this preparation period. In fact, the author has stated that Mare is just below Shelter in combat power. That makes him one of the strongest in all of Nazarick, and given that only a world item can protect the wielder from the effects of another world item, that made the gauntlet serve yet another purpose. All in all, they would protect Mare from other world items, absorb XP from any of the people killed, then potentially enable Mare to freely use some of his most powerful spells without regard for their XP costs. It's a piece of equipment that's perfect for someone like Mare, who has very high tier area of effect spells. Other than that, Mare also has his Shadow of Yggdrasil's staff to serve as his primary weapon, but we already talked about that before, so we'll just move on. On the other side of things, we have Aura, who's basically been working alongside Cocytus to conquer everything around Nazarick for miles. The bulk of this took place after the events of Volume 8, aka the first few episodes of Season 3, which, if you remember from our cut content video, the anime actually retconned some of the timeline of the source material, rearranging certain events to take place in an order that wasn't consistent with the novels. This is important to know because the attack on Carne Village was supposed to take place early on, shortly after the events of the Lizardmen arc. the first major offensive outside Nazarick. It was back when Ainz was still very cautious of other high-level players, and paranoid about drawing attention to himself. Thus, the attack on Carne Village ended up taking place before Cocytus and Aura had enough time to properly bring the areas surrounding Nazarick under control. In any case, the job was divvied up as follows. Cocytus was to work alongside the Lizardmen and focus on demi-human tribes, essentially subjugating through conquest anything was something remotely close to a civilization. They were made to be placed under the banner of Ainz ul Gon, much the same way that the Lizardmen were. Meanwhile, Aura was largely put in charge of scouting the terrain and handling all the wild, feral, or solitary beasts. I mean, she is a collector, so much of her time was spent looking for particularly cool or interesting ones. As a result, she didn't really pay any attention to any of the weaklings. And by weaklings, I mean pretty much anything that was weaker than Hamske. So basically anything under level 40, which for perspective is about as powerful and dangerous as Gazef Stronov. Because of this, when Ainz questioned her about the Giant of the East and the Serpent of the West, she had no clue as to who they even were. This was a bit of a black mark on her reputation as a servant, as Ainz had trusted her to properly scout the terrain and all of its inhabitants, not just the ones that she thought were cool. In addition to scouting, she also oversaw the construction of a decoy Nazarick, with Ainz assigning her various undead laborers. In the long term, its only real purpose was to be used as a potential storehouse for materials. But in the short term, its purpose was multifold. They could trick enemies into thinking it was the real location of Nazarick, then lure them into a trap. Alternatively, if the real Nazarick was discovered and a major assault was launched, surviving members could regroup there in order to organize a counteroffensive. Like I said, Ainz was very concerned that other powerful level 100 players from Yggdrasil might have also been sent to the New World, and he wanted contingency plans in case they ended up to be hostile towards Nazarick. But ultimately, the base ended up being a narrative red herring that was never used for either of these two purposes. Anyway, those were Aura's responsibilities. Now, the final aspect to complete her power profile are her weapons. Just like Mare, she has a main one and a world item. Based on the little knowledge that we have, her primary weapon is some kind of powerful bow, but she also has a secondary weapon called Queen, the whip that we saw her use back in Season 1. Both are pretty typical for her Ranger and Beast Tamer build, but obviously it's the world item that's the most interesting in her arsenal. It's called Depiction of Nature and Society, and just like how Mare was assigned Avarice and Generosity, Aura was likewise awarded a world item for Protection. Ainz really didn't want another Shaltir case happening. Back to the item though. It looks like a large scroll with the image of a landscape, and its ability allows it to trap a group of people, including the user, over an extremely large area inside a pocket dimension of the user's choosing. Escaping the location required those that were trapped to either defeat the user in battle or find one of these special escape points, and successfully doing either would instantly end the effect and automatically take the world item away from the original user and give it to the individual who had escaped. So, if you're planning on using this item, then you better know for sure that you can take on the people that you're trapping. Otherwise, sooner or later someone is going to find an exit and you're going to lose your world item. The user can select from several potential locations, which are depicted as paintings on the scroll itself, and the number of escape points depended upon the terrain that the user chose. Generally, the more dangerous the terrain, the more escape hatches there would be for the opponent. A couple examples of terrains depicted on the scroll would be unbearably hot locations, ones filled with lava and all kinds of other heat-related hazards, or even a location that gave the user a free army at their disposal, though that army would be automatically scaled to be of smaller size and weaker strength than the opponent's force. This was a useful item in its own right, and of course an excellent choice for an NPC like Aura, for her specialization in group battles. Other than that, Aura has in her possession an old belonging of Buku Buku Chagama, a wristwatch rewarded to her for her loyal service to Nazarick. Ainz also gave her the Ring of Sustenance, which allows her to go without food, drink, or sleep. Still though, Ainz liked to run Nazarick as ethically and responsibly as possible, giving his employees time for breaks. So the watch would help Aura keep track of time, for things like the shifts during her construction job or during her excursions and scouting operations outside of Nazarick. Similarly, while many NPCs are undead or otherwise require no sustenance, Aura and Mare are one of the few that actually do. That's why the ring is pretty useful. It not only reduces the expenses associated with needing to feed Nazarick denizens, but it also helps Aura during her scouting operations. By contrast, Mare was given a ring of Ainz ul Gon, which allows him to teleport freely between the various floors of Nazarick. Mare has this ring because he spends a lot more time in Nazarick, and Ainz wanted to make traversal more convenient for him. But Aura didn't get one because Ainz was paranoid that someone from outside Nazarick might try to obtain it and use it to infiltrate the base. It's for this reason that it's forbidden to take one outside of Nazarick, and since Aura spends so much time outside of it anyway, she wouldn't even have a use for the ring. But yeah, that's literally everything about Aura and Mare, which means we have one last floor grading to do in order to complete the entire collection. Cocytus if you watch the dub, and Cocytus if you watch the sub. So expect the first episode of that in a couple of weeks. And I'll be finishing up my Shield Hero Cut content in between, so it'd be really helpful if you guys tuned in to watch that next week as well. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Cacao Games once again for sponsoring this video. Don't forget, you can use the link in the description and start a free 7-day trial of Black Desert Online today. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!